The intake doors clanged behind him, echoing through the narrow hallway of iron bars and concrete walls. Steven Seagal walked in, calm, measured, wearing nothing but a simple prison uniform. His steps were unhurried, deliberate, as if he had all the time in the world. Around him, hardened eyes followed, curious and cautious, whispering among themselves. At the end of the corridor, the gang leader, a man known as Crusher Malone, sat sprawled in the waiting area, broad-shouldered, tattooed, and with an aura of intimidation that had kept every inmate in line for years. He was the unspoken king of this prison. He noticed the new inmate immediately. His eyes narrowed. "Another weakling, huh?" Malone muttered, smirking to his followers. "Looks like dinner's walking in." The guards processed Seagal without incident. He didn't resist, didn't flinch. But there was something about the way he held himself. Quiet, unassuming, yet strangely commanding, that unsettled even the most fearless inmates. Malone stood, approaching with slow, deliberate menace, circling Seagal like a predator testing a novice prey. "You're new here," Malone said, voice low and menacing. "Better learn fast, or you're gonna regret it." Seagal's response was a slow, calm blink. No anger, no hesitation, nothing but an almost serene focus. Malone's grin widened, mistaking composure for fear. He reached out to shove Seagal, a test, a show of dominance. The new inmate didn't move. Just the faintest shift of weight, a subtle adjustment in posture, and the shove barely grazed him. Malone's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, but pride kicked in, masking it. Around them, the other prisoners leaned in, sensing the tension. This was not going to be ordinary. Malone, convinced he was untouchable, whispered threats, boasting of what he'd do if Seagal didn't comply. He underestimated him, as everyone did. Seagal didn't speak. He didn't provoke. He simply studied Malone with quiet intensity, his hands relaxed, his eyes calm. It was as if he already knew the outcome. And Malone, the self-proclaimed king of the yard, had no idea who he was really facing. And in that silence, in that tiny pause before chaos erupted, the whispers began. "That's him, isn't it?" This was not just a new inmate. This was a storm waiting to be unleashed. A man who had walked through far worse and come out unshaken. And Malone was about to learn that fear had a new name. The tension in the yard was electric. Crusher Malone leaned against the wall, his gang members flanking him like shadows. Every eye was on the new inmate, Steven Seagal, who moved slowly toward the outdoor area, hands casually in his pockets, his expression unreadable. Malone stepped forward, cracking his knuckles loudly, the sound echoing across the concrete. "You looking lost, new guy?" he sneered, his voice carrying over the yard. "This is my spot. You step out of line, and you'll regret it." Seagal stopped a few feet away. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't flinch. He simply tilted his head slightly, as if observing a curious insect. His calm aura made Malone's grin falter for just a heartbeat. "Don't just stand there, punk," Malone barked. "Show some respect." One of Malone's followers, a wiry inmate with a permanent sneer, whispered, "Watch this. He's about to fold." Malone lunged forward, intending a shove to assert dominance, but Seagal's body moved like liquid. Smooth, precise, almost too quick to follow. His hands intercepted Malone's arm with minimal effort, redirecting the push in a motion so subtle that the impact barely grazed him. Malone stumbled forward slightly, completely off balance, his gang frozen in shock. Seagal didn't raise his voice. He didn't strike. He simply tilted his head and spoke softly. "You don't have to prove anything, but I suggest you learn respect." The yard went silent. Even the guards paused mid-step, sensing the shift in the air. Malone's face reddened, fury mixing with humiliation. He had been challenged before, but never like this. He tried again. A wild punch aimed to intimidate. Seagal sidestepped effortlessly. His body relaxed yet perfectly controlled. The punch met only air. Malone spun, his momentum carrying him toward the concrete wall. For a brief second, fear flickered in his eyes. The first time he had felt it in years. A hush fell over the yard. Inmates began whispering to each other, leaning forward as if afraid to blink. If you were in Malone's position, would you recognize your mistake and step back, or double down on aggression? Comment below. What would you do if you suddenly realized your opponent was far more skilled than you ever imagined? SEAGAL spoke again, his voice calm but firm. Violence isn't the only way to show power. Control comes from discipline, not fear. You can choose to lead, or you can choose to destroy. The choice is yours. Malone's hands trembled slightly. His gang members exchanged uneasy glances, realizing the table had turned. The new inmate, who looked ordinary, who walked in as if invisible, now held every ounce of control in the yard. Seagal's eyes scanned the faces around him. He wasn't just defending himself. He was showing everyone present a lesson that couldn't be taught in whispers or threats. Human nature revealed itself here. Some would learn from his restraint. Others would continue to challenge. But the lesson was clear. Underestimating someone based on appearances was dangerous. A short human explanation moment. Even the strongest, most intimidating people can be humbled when they face someone who has mastered both mind and body. Power isn't always loud or flashy. Sometimes it's calm, deliberate, and invisible until it's too late. Malone opened his mouth, tried to speak, but no words came. Seagal tilted his head, a faint smile forming, almost imperceptible. The bully had been confronted, not with brute force, but with the quiet authority of someone who had walked through far worse and emerged undefeated. By now the yard was buzzing with whispers of awe. Even the most hardened inmates could sense that this was not a man to be trifled with. Not because of his size or his fists, but because of the calm certainty that radiated from him. Malone finally took a step back, his chest heaving. He had been defeated, without a strike landing. The lesson was clear. Appearances could be deceiving. Arrogance could be deadly. And respect, true respect, could never be demanded. It had to be earned. Malone's retreat was brief. His pride would not allow him to back down so easily. You think this is over? He spat, spittle flying. You're going to pay for humiliating me in front of my crew. Seagal remained calm, his eyes like steel, unblinking. He didn't move forward, didn't flinch. Instead, he shifted his weight slightly, a subtle adjustment that went unnoticed by everyone except Malone. The bully charged, full of anger and overconfidence. His fists were wild, uncoordinated, every strike loud, every movement sloppy. Seagal's response was nothing short of surgical precision. With a single fluid motion, he caught Malone's wrist mid-swing, twisting just enough to send the gang leader sprawling onto the concrete. Not harshly, but enough to break Malone's momentum, leaving him stunned. Before Malone could recover, Seagal's other hand lightly tapped his shoulder, and the man's feet were lifted off the ground in a controlled flip that left the entire yard frozen in disbelief. The other gang members, who had been ready to intervene, hesitated. Their leader, the one they had always looked up to, was on the ground, completely outmatched by a man who looked ordinary, almost fragile in his faded jacket and sneakers. Seagal didn't strike again. He simply adjusted his stance and let Malone scramble to his feet, his face red, his pride shattered. The lesson was clear without a single shouted threat. Skill mattered far more than aggression, and underestimating someone based on appearance could be dangerous. Malone wiped the sweat and blood from his lip, rage burning in his eyes. You'll regret this. he hissed. SEAGAL's voice was soft, but carried across the yard. The only thing you'll regret is assuming that fear and brute force make you powerful. True strength comes from control, discipline, and awareness. Many people confuse aggression with power. But true mastery, in life, in work, or in combat, isn't about how loud or violent you are. It's about control, foresight, and respect for both yourself and others. Malone swung again, but this time, SEAGAL's movement was even more precise. He stepped aside effortlessly, catching the bully's arm and using it to pivot him into the wall with a controlled force that left him gasping. The gang watched, mouths open, realizing they had never encountered anyone like this before. SEAGAL's eyes scanned the yard. This ends now. No one else has to get hurt. His words were calm, but every inmate understood. Challenging him further would be a mistake. Crusher Malone's shoulders slumped. The defiance faded, replaced by a reluctant understanding. His gang members began to back away, murmuring among themselves. The yard, once tense with aggression, was now filled with awe. Have you ever underestimated someone based on their appearance or quiet demeanor, only to be proven wrong? Share your experience in the comments. It could inspire someone to rethink how they judge others. SEAGAL took a single step forward, his presence commanding yet non-threatening. Strength without purpose is meaningless. Dominance achieved through fear is temporary. Respect earned through discipline lasts forever. A few hardened inmates whispered to each other. They had spent years surviving through intimidation. But what they had just witnessed was not intimidation. It was mastery, calm, and precision. Every movement SEAGAL made was efficient, every decision deliberate. And yet he struck no more than necessary. Malone, finally realizing the extent of his defeat, sank to a crouch, hands on his knees, breathing heavily. SEAGAL extended a single hand, not to strike, but as a gesture of choice. You can leave this behind. You can choose to be better, or you can continue down the path that will only bring pain and humiliation. The lesson was more than martial arts. It was human. Fear, aggression, and pride were weapons that could destroy lives. But self-control, awareness, and humility could change everything. Sometimes the strongest lessons are silent. Observing how someone handles conflict, without rage or overreaction, teaches more about power and respect than any fight ever could. Malone slowly straightened, a flicker of shame and realization in his eyes. I understand, he muttered. His gang, silent and shocked, began to disperse, leaving the yard subdued but alive with whispers of admiration and newfound respect. SEAGAL stood alone in the center, calm and composed, a figure who had turned a potential war zone into a lesson on human dignity, discipline, and the true meaning of strength. The prison yard had witnessed a demonstration that would echo long after the event, a moment where violence could have ruled, but restraint and mastery triumphed. The yard was quiet now, the tension replaced by a kind of stunned respect. Inmates who had been ready to fight were moving carefully, not with fear, but with a cautious curiosity. Everyone had seen what had happened, and no one could deny the mastery they had just witnessed. SEAGAL didn't speak immediately. He walked slowly across the yard, observing the reactions of the men around him. His eyes met those of younger inmates who had never seen a demonstration of true control before. He knelt slightly to meet the gaze of one small, wiry boy who had been trembling during the confrontation. "You're safe now," SEAGAL said softly. "No one can hurt you if you carry yourself with awareness and respect. True strength isn't about scaring others or using brute force. It's about giving people a sense of safety, about protecting without needing to dominate." The bully, Malone, had slumped into a corner, rubbing his shoulder where SEAGAL had flipped him earlier. He was no longer the loud, arrogant leader he had been minutes ago. Something had shifted. Pride had been replaced by an awareness of limits. He looked up at SEAGAL, eyes wide with a mixture of fear, shame, and grudging respect. "You could have crushed us all," Malone admitted quietly, voice barely audible. "But you didn't." SEAGAL's expression remained calm, unreadable. "I don't prove my strength by destroying others. That's weakness disguised as power. True power is control, understanding, and restraint. You'll learn that if you choose to survive here with integrity rather than fear." Other gang members nodded silently, some exchanging glances that said more than words ever could. The lesson was clear. Arrogance and aggression were temporary tools. Discipline and respect were permanent currencies. As the minutes passed, whispers filled the yard. Inmates began talking among themselves, sharing their experiences with violence, bullying, and survival. For many, this was the first time someone had confronted a bully, not with fear, not with more violence, but with calm authority and mastery. They listened, they learned, and they reflected. Have you ever witnessed someone handle a difficult situation with calm and skill rather than anger? How did it change the outcome? Share your story in the comments. It might inspire someone to rethink their approach. SEAGAL walked to the benches at the edge of the yard and sat, his movements deliberate and unhurried. Malone approached slowly, kneeling at a respectful distance. I don't know what to say," he admitted. "I've never been stopped like that. Not in a fight, not in life." SEAGAL's voice was soft but firm. "You don't need to say anything. You need to listen, observe, and learn. Your strength is not measured by how many you intimidate, but by how well you control yourself in every situation. Sometimes the most powerful lessons are taught through example rather than words." People don't just need to hear what's right, they need to see it in action. The younger inmates began approaching cautiously, asking questions about SEAGAL's techniques, about discipline, about control. He explained briefly, without pride, without exaggeration, about the principles of awareness, balance, and anticipation. Every word he spoke carried authority, but also an underlying message. Violence without purpose is empty. Mastery without compassion is meaningless. By the end of the day, the yard had transformed. What had been a battlefield filled with fear and tension was now a space of respect and reflection. Conversations had shifted from boasting and threats to discussions about survival, discipline, and the lessons learned from what had happened. Malone, surprisingly, began to take steps toward change. He gathered his crew and spoke to them, his tone subdued but sincere. We need to rethink how we run things. We can't just intimidate everyone. That doesn't make us strong. I've seen what real strength looks like." SEAGAL observed from a distance, letting the words sink in. He didn't intervene. He understood that real change came from within. The seed of awareness had been planted. It was now up to the individuals to decide whether they would nurture it or ignore it. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the yard, SEAGAL stood once more. He looked around at the inmates, at the young men who had never known calm authority, and at the gang members who were beginning to question their past behavior. "This place doesn't have to be ruled by fear," he said quietly. "It can be a place where respect is earned, where skill and integrity matter more than aggression, where every action you take reflects the person you want to be." For many inmates, this was a revelation. Fear had ruled them for years, but now they saw a different path. One where mastery, awareness, and human dignity could coexist even in the harshest conditions. SEAGAL's presence lingered even after he left the yard. The conversations continued. The respect he had earned remained. And somewhere deep inside, the men who had once relied on bullying and brute force began to understand something fundamental. Real strength is silent, controlled, and transformative. The prison yard would never be the same. And neither would the people who had witnessed the quiet legend in action. The days that followed in the prison were unlike anything the inmates had ever experienced. Word of what had happened in the yard spread quickly, carried by whispers, nods, and quiet acknowledgement. SEAGAL's presence had done more than just stop a bully. It had shifted the entire energy of the prison. Fear was no longer the main currency. Respect, discipline, and awareness were. Malone, the former gang leader, had become a reluctant leader of a different sort. His arrogance had been replaced with cautious humility, and for the first time, he began to understand that influence wasn't earned through intimidation. He approached SEAGAL one morning in the courtyard, head bowed slightly, hands nervously clasped. I want to do better, he admitted, voice low but sincere. Not just for me, but for everyone I've led into trouble. I never realized strength could mean protecting rather than hurting. SEAGAL nodded slowly, expression calm, almost unreadable. The choice is yours, he said simply. Actions define us far more than words ever could. Lead with control, lead with awareness, and people will follow, willingly. Not out of fear. Change doesn't happen because someone tells you to, or because they punish you. True change comes when someone inspires you to see a better way, and you take the first step yourself. In the following weeks, small but significant changes began to ripple through the prison. Inmates who had previously avoided confrontation now spoke up, not aggressively, but with a confidence born of self-awareness. Younger prisoners approached SEAGAL with questions about training, discipline, and respect. He demonstrated simple techniques, but more importantly, he shared lessons about composure, perception, and self-control. Every movement, every word, reinforced the idea that power without integrity was meaningless. Even the guards began to notice a shift. Incidents of fighting decreased. Disputes were settled more quickly, and the overall atmosphere grew calmer. SEAGAL did not seek recognition. He walked among the prisoners as one of them, a quiet observer and mentor. Yet his presence alone reminded everyone that strength and wisdom often arrive in unexpected forms. Think about a time someone taught you a lesson without yelling, threatening, or punishing you. How did that change the way you acted afterward? Share your story below. It could help someone see a new path. SEAGAL also focused on mentoring specific individuals who had been most lost in the cycle of aggression. He worked closely with young men who had been labeled as troublemakers, teaching them not only martial arts, but also conflict resolution, discipline, and empathy. A fight isn't just physical, he told one young inmate. It's also mental, emotional, and sometimes spiritual. Learn to master yourself first, and you'll never be truly defeated. Malone's transformation was gradual but undeniable. He began organizing group activities that promoted teamwork rather than dominance, encouraging inmates to look out for each other rather than exploit weakness. He even helped younger prisoners develop personal goals, something that would have been unimaginable before. For the first time, leadership in the prison wasn't about who could strike the hardest, it was about who could inspire the most. SEAGAL's influence extended beyond individual interactions. Rules that had been strictly enforced without explanation were now paired with guidance. Inmates were given responsibility in small, meaningful ways. Managing work assignments, mentoring younger prisoners, helping mediate disputes. This sense of purpose reduced tension and gave everyone a stake in the prison's stability. By the end of the month, the transformation was clear. The yard, once a place of constant intimidation, was now a space of cautious collaboration. People were still wary, still aware of boundaries, but the energy was no longer toxic. Respect replaced fear as the dominant force. The lesson SEAGAL had demonstrated, that strength is most meaningful when paired with compassion, that control is more powerful than aggression, had begun to take root. As he walked through the yard one evening, watching Malone guide a group of younger inmates through a training drill, SEAGAL allowed himself a rare smile. The seeds had been planted, but the growth would be ongoing. Change wasn't instant, and redemption wasn't guaranteed. It was something each person had to choose every single day. He paused, looking out over the yard, thinking quietly to himself. Real power is measured not by fear or intimidation, but by the ability to inspire transformation in others. That was the lesson the prison had learned. That was the lesson Malone had learned. And that was the lesson SEAGAL had made sure would never be forgotten. Weeks turned into months, and the transformation within the prison became undeniable. The yard, once a battlefield of egos and fear, now hummed with quiet respect. Inmates walked with more purpose, conflicts were resolved with words instead of fists, and even the guards noticed a drop in tension. The name Steven SEAGAL no longer inspired fear alone, it carried weight as a symbol of discipline, integrity, and the kind of quiet authority that commands respect without threats. Malone had fully embraced his new role. No longer a tyrant, he had become a mentor in his own right, guiding younger prisoners in ways SEAGAL had taught him. He still possessed strength, but now it was tempered by wisdom. He understood that leadership is not measured by how many people obey you, but by how many people grow under your guidance. SEAGAL, however, remained the calm center of the prison. He moved among the inmates, answering questions, offering guidance, and demonstrating techniques. But more than that, he instilled principles, control over oneself, awareness of others, and the understanding that true strength is invisible until it's needed. Every punch taught restraint. Every stance taught readiness. Every lesson taught respect. Have you ever seen someone turn their life around after a wake-up moment? What inspired the change? Share your thoughts below. It might encourage someone who feels stuck. The prison library had become an unlikely sanctuary. SEAGAL encouraged reading and self-education, teaching that the mind is as critical a weapon as the body. Inmates who once spent hours in idle mischief now devoured books on philosophy, strategy, and martial arts. One young man, who had once mocked SEAGAL openly, now approached him cautiously, notebook in hand. "I want to learn more," he said quietly. "Not just fighting, but life." SEAGAL smiled, recognizing the same spark of potential he had seen in Malone months ago. Even those who had once resisted change were slowly adapting. The older, hardened inmates realized that compliance wasn't weakness. Understanding, restraint, and careful observation were signs of strength. Tension melted into cautious camaraderie, and while the prison was still a challenging environment, it was no longer defined by aggression alone. SEAGAL's influence extended to those who had once doubted him, proving that one person's integrity can ripple outward, transforming an entire system. The final confrontation that had sparked the change, the initial encounter with Malone, was now a story retold not as a tale of violence, but as a lesson in the power of discipline, courage, and calm authority. Sometimes, the people we underestimate are the ones who can teach us the most. True power is not about fear or dominance. It's about inspiring change, even in those who resist it most. One evening, as SEAGAL stood on the upper tier overlooking the yard, Malone approached him. "I can't thank you enough," he admitted. "You didn't just stop me from being a tyrant. You showed me what leadership really means. You showed me what I can become if I choose the right path." SEAGAL nodded, placing a hand on Malone's shoulder. "The path is always yours to walk," he said. "I only pointed the way. Every choice, every action you take from here shapes not just your life, but the lives of everyone around you. Don't waste that power." The prison, once a microcosm of fear and brutality, had become a place where respect, growth, and quiet strength mattered. Inmates, guards, and even the administration had learned that change isn't forced, it's inspired. And that was the ultimate lesson SEAGAL had left behind. The moral was clear. True power is measured not by fear you instill, but by the lives you uplift. One act of integrity can transform not just an individual, but an entire community. The story of the prison gang leader and the new inmate, the martial arts legend, would be told for years. Not as a tale of revenge, but as a testament to the enduring strength of discipline, courage, and respect. And somewhere, in the quiet of the yard, SEAGAL smiled, knowing the work he had done would continue to ripple far beyond the prison walls. The echoes of the events that had unfolded in the prison still lingered long after the initial confrontations. The yard was quieter now, but the lessons were louder than ever. SEAGAL's presence had been more than a physical deterrent. It had been a living example of integrity, discipline, and the transformative power of respect. Malone, the former gang leader, had become a living testament to change. He moved with a different kind of confidence now, one not fueled by intimidation, but by awareness. The inmates who had once feared him now sought his guidance. But it was not fear that commanded obedience. It was the knowledge that he had seen the consequences of cruelty, arrogance, and ignorance firsthand. SEAGAL had taught them that strength without control is chaos, and control without compassion is emptiness. The martial arts techniques he demonstrated were important, yes, but they were only the vessel. The true lesson lay in how one carries power, with restraint, with awareness, and with responsibility. Think about a time when someone quietly influenced you without demanding it. How did their actions change your behavior? Comment below. Your story might inspire someone else. The prison staff had noticed the change too. Guards reported fewer incidents, fewer disputes. Even those who had doubted SEAGAL's approach now admitted that the atmosphere was calmer, safer, and more cooperative. Respect had become the currency, not fear. And that respect flowed in all directions, from inmates to guards, from veteran prisoners to newcomers. In quiet moments, SEAGAL would watch the yard, observing the small victories. A disagreement resolved with words instead of fists, an older inmate helping a younger one navigate the rules, a gang leader showing restraint instead of retribution. Each of these moments, though subtle, was a victory in itself. Sometimes the greatest victories are not the loudest or the most visible. True success is measured in the small changes that lead to lasting impact. He also encouraged reflection and accountability. Each inmate was asked to write about their experiences, the mistakes they had made, the consequences they had faced, and the lessons they had learned. These writings became part of a larger program, focused on personal growth and rehabilitation. It wasn't punishment that transformed them, it was understanding, responsibility, and the chance to correct their paths. SEAGAL's presence, though legendary, was not about glorifying himself. It was about showing that everyone has potential for change, no matter their past, and that respect and dignity are never out of reach. Even Malone admitted that he had never truly understood what it meant to lead until he faced someone who wielded strength without cruelty. And so, the prison became a microcosm of what the world could be if people approached each other with respect, understanding, and compassion. It was not utopia. Mistakes still happened. Tempers still flared. But the culture had shifted. People had learned that real power is not intimidation. It is influence. Real strength is not dominance. It is character. The story of the prison gang leader and the martial arts legend concluded not with a final fight, but with lasting transformation. It reminded everyone, inmates, guards, and future generations, that humility, courage, and integrity are the measures of a life well lived, not wealth, status, or fear. SEAGAL, quietly standing at the edge of the yard for the last time, reflected on what had been accomplished. He knew that change was never guaranteed, but he also knew that a single act of principled action could ripple outward, touching lives in ways no one could predict. As he walked away, the yard no longer hummed with tension. It buzzed with potential. The lesson was clear. True respect is earned by how you treat those others underestimate. And true strength is shown not in how you fight, but in how you guide. And with that, the story came to an end. Not with vengeance or triumph over enemies, but with the quiet, profound victory of lives transformed.